Hello all, and welcome to this Prakash Gole Memorial Discussion Series hosted by Ecological Society and Friends of Ecological Society on this very unique subject of ecological restoration. My name is Ketaki Ghate, and sitting with me is Manasi Karandikar.
Hello everyone.
Both of us are faculty and core member at Ecological Society. So both of us will be hosting this program along with Dr. Swati Gole, who is chairman of Ecological Society. And also amongst panelists, there are trustees, Ajay Phatak is there, and friends of Ecological Society members like Santosh is there, Madhavi is there, and many volunteers at backstage are there. And also we have very eminent speakers for us today for this discussion series. One of them is Pradip Krishen. Many of you must have heard about his books, and Ramesh Venkataraman from Chennai. Yeah, so welcome you all for this wonderful series on ecological restoration.
Yeah. So I welcome you all on behalf of Ecological Society, and we will start with a brief introduction of Ecological Society, Gole sir's work, and of course the panelists.
Yeah, so just to tell you a quick history about Ecological Society. So Ecological Society was started by Prakash Gole back in 1982. And he was really a visionary person. Actually, he started with trekking and then much of field work and bird watching back in 60s. So that time, all these activities were quite rare in Pune. And slowly, actually, he then went towards this bird watching and ultimately ecology. So he was originally an economist, then converted into ornithologist and ultimately ecologist. So he actually, if actually I wish to talk about Gole sir, maybe just 1 hour would be much less. So talking about him in such 5 minutes is really difficult. But he had said that it's high time that we recognize rights of non-human beings to be on this earth, not only because they have right to be on this earth, but just because we are dependent on them. And Gole sir, being economist, he always used to connect ecology to economy. And for the sustainable economic development, he had always suggested ecological restoration is the right answer, because the resources can be restored, can be refilled only with the help of ecological restoration and conservation. And though then only we would be able to achieve like sustainable growth. That's what his argument used to be. And then one of the sentence that we always remember, he used to say that people can have choices, but wildlife cannot. Yeah, so it's high time we recognize their need to be on the earth, their right to be on the earth. And with the help of ecological restoration, we actually create some such conditions which are absolutely safe for them. And at the same time, we are dependent on it. So we take it ahead. So Gole sir has written more than 25 books in Marathi and English, and many of those are available in our office at Ecological Society. He has written many research articles, and in the form of say, so we still publish Journal of Ecological Society every year. So it is available for all viewers to see and download. It is there on our website. Yeah, so another wonderful thing that Gole sir did is he established this wonderful course in ecology, which both of us and many of us have done many years back. That course basically is developed as an education program which runs through the year, and it is just to develop a perspective to look at our own surroundings, our own lifestyle, and also at a bigger scale, our nations and our economies. So that program we've been running since last
25 years.
25
so
years.
From 1998, it has been running.
It has been running, and the only perspective is that all participants should learn this perspective to look at surroundings, lifestyle, and also learn this conservation lesson ultimately, which can be definitely implemented on ground in our own day-to-day lifestyle. And also
all these participants and the alumnus are very strongly connected with each other. So till now we have almost 1,000 members who are past students of this course, and they always get connected to Ecological Society and are doing very wondrous things in their own lives.
So along with this education program, Ecological Society also has been conducting various studies. So just to name a few, say study of Panchit catchment, which is there in Western Ghats, study of Bhima Shankar sanctuaries, and come up with some kind of landscape management tool which can be implemented. Then study of river Mula Mutha. So this was done like much back when all this current RFD, that is riverfront development, was not there, and he had suggested some kind of policy guideline to governments. And recent studies are again revision or revised survey of Panchit catchment and Dimbe catchment, and
even river Mula,
Mula Mutha, and also one study which is absolutely recent is study of after effects of cyclone Nisarga. So all these reports are there on website of Ecological Society. You can surely download and read about it. And after this, let me just introduce all our panelists little briefly again. So Dr. Swati Gole, fondly we call Gole Madam. She is MA and PhD with a specialization in geomorphology. Thanks to her, whatever we know of soils and geology is just because of her. She was professor of geography at SP College and has in-depth knowledge about soil and geology and all these processes. And also she has done various studies related to sediment mapping, soil mapping, geomorphic processes within Western Ghats. And of course, she has contributed a lot to Gole sir's work on various ecosystems from wetlands to forests. So absolutely, she's one of the very expert authority in the field of ecological restoration. Then we have Pradip Krishen, so well-known author, and I'm sure many of you know his book, wonderful book, Jungle Trees of Central India, and it's kind of landmark book, we always feel. Then his Trees of Delhi book is also quite famous. Abha Mahal Bagh, Garden of Wild Plants from Thar Desert, is also one of the book he's written. And his new book, which is on Delhi Central Ridge, is quite awaiting. So if you Google for Pradip Kishan, you would know that he has directed few films. Yeah. And he lives in Delhi with his daughters and dogs, as he says. Yeah. So welcome, Pradip. Welcome to this session. And then we have Ramesh Venkataraman from Chennai, who has been actively engaged in ecological restoration since 2007. So he is managing trustee of Junglescapes, which is a charitable trust in Chennai. And they've been working in and around Bandipur National Park in Karnataka. The restoration work he carried out through community participation model is really wonderful. And until now, they have covered 3,000 acres. That's quite a number, Ramesh. Yeah. So he's also on the board of directors of Society for Ecological Restoration, ACR. So ACR is a leading world body for ecological restoration. And he's also certified ecological restoration practitioner. Yeah, so that's really something. Since January 19, he's member of expert committee on invasive species constituted by High Court of Madras for addressing this management of invasive and alien plant species. And he's got expertise in all assisted natural regeneration methods and dealing with invasive plants. Yeah. So wonderful to have you both, Pradeep and Ramesh. If you just wish to quickly say something before we actually start.
Thank you so much, Ketaki, for your warm words. Listening to you, I only wish that I had met Prakash Gole Sahab. I feel very, very sad that I'm deprived of having known him and being able to, gain from his experience and his knowledge. But thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this.
And thank you, Ketaki. It's indeed a privilege to be part of the Prakash Gole Memorial Lecture Series. I think Gole sir was a pioneer and he was well ahead of his times, actually, because in the 1970s, he started working on restoration and also writing about restoration at a time when ecological restoration was not very well known, not just in India, but all around the world. because that was the time when other contemporary pioneers like Andre Clevel were also starting to do their work. So he was a contemporary of the global pioneers. And what is interesting is that his writings are as relevant today as when he wrote them 40 years back. And I think after Gole sir's time, there was a long gap in ecological restoration in India. And it has restarted maybe 10 or 15 years back. There was indeed a gap, but his works actually guide us even now. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and just to tell about both of us, so both of us, we did this education program under Gole sir himself 20 years back, and we started Oikos for Ecological Services. It's an ecological enterprise, and we mainly work with private landowners for ecological restoration of lands and habitat creation. And we also have a nursery of native plants. And of course, both of us volunteer at Ecological Society to teach in this program. Yeah, so that's all about all of us. I think now it's over to Gole madam to present certain concepts of ecological restoration and a case study that both of them had initiated 2 decades back almost. Yeah.
Hello and namaste, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about our first restoration experiment. We started with the forest restoration, and which was followed by wetland restoration and the grassland restoration. This was an early effort of restoration by Prakash Ghate sir through Ecological Society. I'll tell you some background before we start the restoration experiment. In 1984 and 85, Ghate sir conducted a survey of Panshet catchment. Panshet catchment is the catchment of a Panshet Dam, which is 40 kilometers west of Pune, and the source for water for Pune city. Environment Ministry gave us this project. The title of the project is a bit long: an inquiry into a status of animal and plant life in the critical areas of Western Ghat, in order to evolve a plan to conserve their biological diversity. This survey, when we started for this survey, the Panshet catchment was rather remote. There were, in the interior parts of the Panshet catchment, there were no roads. So the survey, for the survey, we actually did a camping. We stayed in a tent and we walked all through the interior part of the Panshet catchment. And what we realized after the survey is the physical setup of the catchment area is completely degraded. And the reasons for the degradation were, because of the construction of dam, these villages which were adjacent to the main river, they were shifted to the higher contours. So, and when they were shifted to higher contours, their rice cultivation was not possible. They had to stop their rice cultivation and they have to shift to the shifting cultivation of nachni and other coarser millets. And for shifting cultivation, they have to burn the forest, patch of forest, then make coal out of the forest, whatever is cut down. So the whole catchment area above on the higher contours, the slopes were very steep, and on the steep slopes, the activities of shifting cultivation, burning of forest, burning of land, that whole scenario was the complete degradation of the whole catchment. And after looking at this, Prakash thought that there should be some solution and there should be some guiding line for the villagers which are residing in the Panchet catchment. They also needed biotic resources such as cattle. For cattle, they needed grass, and for their daily needs like for cooking and cooking, etc., they needed wood also. So that has become very scarce. So how to go about increasing grass production and wood production? Then to combat this situation, he thought that we must have a showcasing of a experiment of forest restoration. Then we approached irrigation department, and Prakash Gole was very well acquainted with the irrigation department because he used to conduct workshops for environmental water management. So irrigation department gave us land on lease for this experiment, and which was very close to reservoir, Panchet reservoir. However, between the land and the reservoir, there was a big elevation difference. So we couldn't use water from the reservoir for the restoration purposes. And the site that they gave us was extremely degraded because it was a borrow pit. So there was earthen Panchet dam, which broke in 1962. For a construction of that earthen dam, they took soil from the adjacent areas, and from where they take soil for construction of dam, that is called as borrow pit. So they gave us such a land which was completely degraded, and there wasn't any soil. So we had to focus on protection rather than plantation. So main focus was regenerative, to increase the regenerative capacity of vegetation, and project should be able to transform from xeric to mesic conditions, that is from dry conditions to moist conditions. So naturally, we couldn't plant many trees because of the dearth of water, and we couldn't give water to the plantation. So more focus was on the protection. Then changes in the biodiversity were meticulously documented. That is the highlight of the project, because very minute changes were also all documented in the biodiversity as well as in the changes in the soil conditions, soil moisture conditions, temperatures. Everything was very meticulously documented. Then it was to provide rationale for ecologically sound means of yielding income for the locals. Since this was the pioneering project in the field of restoration, the data generated is relevant as a guide for further restoration projects. Of course, for the region, given climatic region, that region is tropical, high rainfall region and medium rainfall region. Yeah. So for such a kind of climate, that can become a sort of a guideline if anybody wants to duplicate or make more restoration projects. These are some of the pictures, very old pictures from 84, 85. So the rampant forest cutting was going on in the Panchet catchment, and the trucks could go up to certain point, and they also used to make coal out of cutting forest, and coal and the wood, both they used to transport from cattle on a cattle back up to this truck point, because the most of the area was devoid of any kind of, even kacha roads were not there, and they had to transport coal and the wood to the truck point over the back of the cattle. Then this is the project site, and you can see that how it is devoid of soil. You can see the cut that has taken soil from for the construction of dam. So project site was totally degraded. This is the distant view of the project site. This is the project site. The adjacent areas are also, you will see that there is hardly any vegetation. Most of the slopes are degraded, except in the streams, you will see the big trees. And this is the area which is totally devoid of any kind of vegetation, except few shrubs. This is Mangaon Devrai, which is in the interior part of the Panchayat catchment. And this Devrai is the reference point for the project. And whatever vegetation, species of particular trees, those were the guidelines for the plantation. Whatever plantation we did, we had a reference point of this particular Devrai. Then we have to first work on the land for conserving whatever soil gets from the upper slopes. It comes to the project site and then further goes down into the reservoir. So in order to stop soil erosion, we did a lot of contour bunding and nala plugging, then tried to do some habitat constructions. So habitat diversity also we did. And we started in 1986, and in the first monsoon, because of the protection and whatever we did on the ground, like contour bunding, etc., there was a profuse growth of grass in the first year itself. You can see even in the lean period of monsoon, grass was rampant. Then in the third year of the project, snakes started inhabiting the area. And that was the indicator that the surface temperature, land surface temperature must have been lowered now, so that they started inhabiting. Then there was natural growth of shrubs. Some shrubs became taller on by the third year. And now, after 35 years, the place looks like this. And we also connected villages. In the process, we also connected villages, adjacent villages, and we did not allow them to graze their cattle inside the project area, but we told them to cut the grass after the monsoon. And we used to give very large quantities of grass to the adjacent villages. So this is how the project went on for last almost 35 years. We are still running the project, and well, you can say that it's a good example of forest restoration. Though it takes very long time, for forests to grow. Yeah, thank you.
So I would like to just add here quickly that this is, I think, one of its kind first experiment which was done in India. So quite a pioneering work which is done by Gole sir and madam, and it's a very good example. Yeah. So I think now we'll just go towards our next presentation, and in which we'll briefly talk about Oikos project that we've been doing, how we can integrate same ecological principles in various lands. So it could be pure ecological restoration or integrating it for some other purpose. Yeah. So
Yeah. So these are few of the examples of conservation and restoration of nature. So we work with private landowners, and yeah. So what is restoration is basically the soil moisture conservation, that is the like restoring the physical structure, then creating some habitats for biodiversity. So this sometimes you have to create, or sometimes that happens eventually once the soil and moisture conservation happens. So this habitat creation is for forests, for grasslands, for rivers, streams, ponds, and various habitats. So basically this layer will add to a variety of habitats, and that in turn attracts a lot of biodiversity. So that is very important, because diversity is the key in restoration. Otherwise, restoration and plantation, that's the difference, that in plantation you can't have the natural diversity, and in restoration, because it is happening on its own, the nature is getting its own course, so the diversity is getting added on its own. And third is the introduction of special flora. So these are the few principles that we follow on macro level to micro level. So these principles we follow in each and every project, and we'll go through few of our work that has been happening since last 20 years now. So this is Ranwa project at one Kusavadi on 24 acres. So we have done some physical work like this, the loose boulder burns on gullies, because there were some few erosive structures on the land. Then this is what happened when the restoration started happening. So change in soil temperature. In summers, the soil temperature under grass, it was less than 12 to 14 degrees than the open soil. So this is one of the remarkable result that we got of restoration. Then watering.
And this is just because of the biomass we started accumulating.
Yeah.
So the moment you protect any grass layer, it keeps on adding to the upper topsoil layer. So changing the physical feature first is the key here.
Right. So eventually what happened, because of this increase in biomass, then reduction in soil temperature and availability of more moisture, the watering need for all these trees reduced. So we planted few of these special trees like Dhoop, Kasvi, then Fansada, Ransafa, and they started growing better after 4 or 5 years. So that was the key learning of this project. And this is how the land has transformed over the years. Now this project started in 2005, and this was the land condition in that time, and obviously the bird diversity was very low. The birds were associated with open conditions like the pied bush chat or bulbul. Then eventually changed to better quality grasses, perennial grasses, then to having some shrubs on the land, and the bird diversity which we used as indicator also changed to shrike and pipits, and they also started nesting there. So which was a major thing, that nesting of birds or nesting of any faunal species is important, because they find this area as a safe habitat and also food in abundance. So these are two key things that happens if you start restoring. And now after 10 year and 14 year, you can see that it had changed to more number of clusters. The clusters have increased, and also there is change in bird species to fowls. So this is how a land can change over the years if we give them protection, if we give assistance to nature and some physical structure which are being implemented there, like burns and creating ponds. So similar thing is happening here near Pune, which is over 60 acres. We call it as Rahar for the forest. So this is how that land is, and we need to focus on few areas which are very open, and we can actually, it's okay if we don't focus on the dense canopy areas right now. So this is how we started working, by creating a fire line, by having a thorn fence and a live hedge, then having appropriate structures for soil conservation, then faunal documentation and flora documentation. This is also important. So we got some nice faunal species that are frequently coming. The leopard is coming infrequently, once in a while. So, but we have, yeah, we have good diversity of these things. Then we are also working on RET species on this land. So this Abutilon ranadei, which is recently assessed as a vulnerable species in IUCN Red List, we got it air layered, and it is now nicely growing on the land. And we are also working on orchid conservation, because that area is very good for orchids. So we are working for orchid conservation, and these are few of the species that we have rescued and revived on the land. Yeah, so this is one of the other project, which is over 7 acres near Pauna, and here it is integrated to have restoration and some plantation. So basically we started with 3 years of protection to the grass, so that all this soil and moisture conservation can happen, the soil fertility can increase, and then do phase-wise plantation of appropriate plants. So on the 7 acres, we have 3.5 acres of forest, 1 acre of food forest, and 2.5 acres of mixed land use, where the humans will actually go. So this is not only for restoration or only for wilderness, but here this land use is little mixed. So you can see these are few of the pictures, and the grass varieties like Paunia, which is the one of the good fodder species, have come on its own. So we have not planted that. This is how the wilderness is now coming back, and we planted around 1,500 native tree species, considering the rainfall and the topography of that area. And now that land harbors almost 140 native floral species. And we could see that after 10 years, the fireflies have come back to the land. Earlier, it was not possible for them to live on the land. So this is how that land had changed.
So actually, just to add one little bit, that actually most of our projects are like this Pauna project.
Yeah.
So there are very few projects wherein pure ecological restoration happening, but most of the project we're trying to integrate it in some resort development or farmhouse development. Yeah.
So we saw a few of the case studies of large lands, and there are also, we work on smaller lands also, where this kind of work is integrated. So it's not only for the restoration, as Ketaki said, but it is some farmhouse, some resort which is happening. So these are lands which are of 1 acre, 2 acre, 3 acre land. So this is how the picture is today. So there are numerous farmhouse schemes that are coming up around cities in the fringes, and which actually disrupts the connectivity in the landscape. So here you can see this small portion, which is half an acre. And if we start creating some small refuge on these areas where wilderness is a prominent feature, then these lands could get connected, and entire landscape could get connected through the corridors. So these are few of the efforts that we are doing. So this is near Khanapur, which is over half an acre, where we started in 2009, and now you can see that it's a arboretum of 85 rare species. So here also first protection was given. So we have combined the restorative activities with plantation. And this is where we have not used any cement in the landscape or any lawn in the landscape. And this is how the birds and butterflies have started now coming back. This is near Bhugav, over 2 acres, where prominent thing is butterfly garden, but there is also an area where we are planting all the native trees of that area to create a forest kind of habitat. So something like this. So this is again near Bhugav, where we have divided that land into few zones. And if you see here, half of the land is under forest. So almost 0.5 acres is under forest, and this is how treatment to every developmental land if be, then we can achieve little bit of conservation in each and every land parcel, and that can be connected through to form a corridor. So these are the results in 4 years. So we can see now a good fair canopy forest has formed. And these are few of the other habitats that are there on the land, like a shrubby habitat as a transition zone, then manicured area, ponds. And we have also documented all the changes on this land so that we could know what birds and butterflies and reptiles are coming back to the land after the construction activity is over. Then this is in for BIOF Jawar, their campus, which is a training campus over 2 acres. So where the plantation was the focus. So this is how the area now looks, which is with plantation. Then this is near WADA, which is a Quest, which is an organization NGO working for education. So there we had a climate subsidy, so we could have existing trees and newly planted trees which are growing really well. So this is how we can combine because otherwise in any farmhouses, people generally cut down the existing forest trees because thinking they are all, ये तो जंगली है, क्यों चाहिए, thorny है, क्यों चाहिए. So we said that no, we want these, we will use it as a cover crop and use it for benefit of newly planted trees. So this is how the area looks now. And also fish ladders, because this is one of the very important activity that you have to do when we work on watersheds and all those restorative work for larger developments. So we worked with BIOF for creating these fish ladders on their existing dams so that the cyclic activity of fishes can be restored and their life cycle can be brought back to normal. So that was one of the experiments that we did in Nashik area. And this is one of the projects that is going on over 100 acres where we are planning to have various habitats and also forests. So it will be like 30 acres of land out of this 100 acres will be dedicated to forests and plantations, which the work has already started there since 2015. And now the forest, the road avenue looks like this, where we have almost 2,500 trees of 57 native species. So these were some of the examples where we can have the restoration and plantation combined so that we can actually initiate the process of restoration, the process of natural regeneration, because that is very important. You cannot introduce native species just by plantation. There has some other ways by which it does. So it can get introduced by wind, it can get introduced by water, it can get introduced by the fauna, by dropping of birds. So all these things have to be assisted with our activities. So this is what we are doing. And yeah, so this was a brief about few of the case studies. Now we will go to the our distinguished panelist.
Yeah, so over to Ramesh now. Ramesh, it would be nice if you could just share your screen, and
Thank you.
Ramesh is going to talk about significance of UN decade for ecological restoration. So I'm sure many of you would know that this year this decade UN had dedicated to ecological restoration. And actually, just to add a little bit, very recently, this our great naturalist biologist E.O. Wilson passed away, and he had actually said, or he had mentioned somewhere, that the next century is going to be the ecological restoration era. This is what he had said, and we really hope that this comes true.
Happens, yeah.
That happens. So yeah, over to Ramesh.
Thank you very much, Ketaki, and warm good evening to everyone, and wish all of you a restorative new year in all senses of the term. Over the next few minutes, I'll try to share my thoughts on the global significance of the UN decade, the Indian context, and the role of the Society for Ecological Restoration, the ACR in short, towards the UN decade. The UN declaration came out of a resolution which was adopted by the General Assembly in March 2019. And this was championed by El Salvador, a country in Central America. They did a lot of lobbying with the UN members to make this a reality. So we should really be thankful to El Salvador for getting the UN decade announced. This is the operative part of the UN resolution. It has two important aspects. One is supporting and scaling up efforts to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. And the second important aspect is raising awareness of the importance of successful ecosystem restoration, which is what I believe this webinar is also trying to do. There's another operative part, very important operative part of the resolution, which says that it encourages member states to foster political will, mobilize resources, build capacity, and encourage scientific research for building momentum for ecosystem restoration at different scales. This is a very important part of the resolution because it squarely places the responsibility for catalyzing ecosystem restoration on the various governments of the various countries, so that it is very clear as to who has to drive this. The UN has also come out with a set of principles for ecological restoration, about 10 principles. I will not go into details of each of these. You can go into the UN Decade website. There's a good description of all these principles. These have been prepared by jointly by a number of global organizations like IUCN, FAO, ACR, etc. Why is ecological restoration become so crucial that the United Nations had to take note of it? Conventional thinking has always been that if you leave a degraded ecosystem alone, it will recover on its own. So conservation is sufficient for recovery of impaired ecosystems. However, over the last 50 to 60 years, our natural ecosystems are facing a rate of degradation or damage, which is much faster than the capacity for self-recovery. And therefore, there is a net loss in our entire ecosystems, healthy ecosystems available for on Earth. And therefore, if you want to reverse this to a net gain, restoration becomes very important. So that is why we say that conservation is no longer enough and we need to restore. What has changed in the last 60 years? Quite a few things have changed. One is population growth, especially in continents like Asia, rapid industrialization with a move from environment-friendly, localized economies to environment-unfriendly, globalized economies. Lifestyle changes with very high levels of consumption, very high GDP focus, a lopsided focus on GDP, which ignores other measures of welfare for human beings. And infrastructure focus is an important one. Ever since the Great Depression in the US, all governments believe that the only way to revive sick economies is by investing more and more in infrastructure, which we see all around the world, even now after COVID. And that is leading, all these factors are leading to a high level of degradation, which was not seen in the previous period before the last 60 years. Why do we need ecological restoration? It was covered by Ketaki and Manasi also. The protection of biodiversity is the primary reason. However, species extinction is now a major concern around the world, and ecological restoration is very important for slowing down species extinction, because restoration helps in providing better habitats where multiple species that are related to each other can survive and increase in numbers. The second important reason is reinstatement of impaired ecosystem services. There are a number of ecosystem services that ecosystem provide us. I've mentioned some of them here. We are seeing increased natural disasters all around the world due to primarily due to degradation, combined with climate change, of course. But the impact of climate change is actually accentuated by degradation. Climate change mitigation, again, there is a belief that we need to increase tree cover for combating climate change. However, many other ecosystems like grasslands and wetlands have an equal or greater potential for sequestering carbon. So restoration of these ecosystems becomes important. Livelihoods are impacted by degraded ecosystems, whether it is people dependent on rivers or oceans, the livelihoods are impacted by degradation. So there are multiple ecosystem services that have got impaired, and restoration is important to restore these services for the welfare of human beings. If we want to understand the significance of the UN decade, we also need to understand what do we mean by ecological restoration and what do we not mean by ecological restoration, and how is it different from other approaches. Whenever I tell people that we are engaged in ecological restoration, the immediate question is, are you planting trees? And this is something which Ketaki and Manasi also referred to just now. So how is it different from afforestation and reforestation? This is a simple definition of ecological restoration coming out of the international standards. It is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So we are not trying to reinstate an ecosystem on our own. We are only assisting the recovery of nature. And when we say recovery of nature, it is the recovery of the natural processes that go up to create an ecosystem. So that is what we are trying to revive, the natural processes. Ecological restoration applies to all ecosystems, which are very, very diverse. Many of them don't have trees at all. So the question of planting trees does not arise. So we have aquatic ecosystem, we have intermediate ecosystems like wetlands, and we could have terrestrial ecosystems. And within terrestrial ecosystems, we have grasslands, deserts, etc., which are not dominated by presence of trees. And even within woody forests, if you take ecosystems like dry deciduous forests or thorn scrub forests, trees form only a small part of the entire flora. There are other kinds of flora which are also present. So trees are not dominant part of most of the ecosystems worldwide, including India. Restoration is a holistic activity. It aims to at the recovery of multiple ecosystem parameters or attributes. Every ecosystem has multiple attributes, which I have tried to show in this diagram. And when we look at a degraded ecosystem, there may be one or two attributes which are largely impaired. But as a result of that, the other attributes also get affected. So in most degraded ecosystems, most of these parameters would be affected to some degree or the other. And therefore, ecological restoration tries to restore the various attributes, and flora is only one part of that. It has a high focus on building ecological resilience. By resilience, we mean the ability to withstand future disturbances and the ability to be sustainable. And for that, it is important that we follow the natural progression of ecosystems. As Ketaki and Manasi mentioned, we start with looking at the foundational aspects like soil and hydrology. Once those are restored, we have the vegetation coming back. Even amongst the vegetation, we first have the pioneer species coming back, and then we have the successional species coming back, and then we have the fauna which comes back. And that is the natural progression that restoration follows. So it is not a top-down approach of trying to plant trees on a degraded piece of land, because then those trees will not survive. There is a high focus on ecological integrity. So we are very particular that we do not alter ecosystems. Alteration of ecosystems is a serious issue nowadays. A large number of grasslands in India have got altered because people have gone and planted trees, considering them to be open spaces. Species integrity, again, very important. We try to revive species that are native to a particular ecosystem. Optimal intervention means we only intervene to the extent that is required, which depends on the degree of resilience that is remaining in the ecosystem. So we do not try to excessively restore a particular or excessively put in inputs for restoration. And self-organization is extremely important. Allow the ecosystem to organize by itself rather than interfering intensively. Restoration has wide application, and it covers both natural or wilderness areas and cultural landscapes. As we saw in the previous presentation, they presented a number of human-dominated areas where the ecology is getting revived. And those are what we call cultural landscapes. And therefore, you could have projects in towns and cities. You could have projects in rural areas like restoration of village ponds or sacred groves, or even conversion of farmers from pesticide-driven farming to organic farming. all these form a continuum of restoration, which is equally important, and it's now got recognized by the UN that this entire continuum is important. It is not just restoration of natural areas, which is important. And scientific research is showing that when you restore natural areas and side by side, you restore the cultural landscapes as well, the impact of the natural restoration is much, much higher than when you do restoration of natural areas as a standalone effort. Important question, what is the relationship between restoration ecology and conservation biology? These are distinct disciplines, but they share common biodiversity goals. Conservation biology, as we know, is about conservation of threatened species mostly. It has a high focus on fauna, and therefore the underlying methodologies and sciences are different. They focus on population dynamics, genetic variations, etc. Whereas restoration ecology is about restoring an ecosystem as a whole, and the underlying approach and sciences again are different. It's more about flora, it's more about sciences related to soil, hydrology, regeneration of species, management of invasive species, etc. So they're complementary, but they're very distinct disciplines, and that is very important to bear in mind. How has ecological restoration evolved as a discipline? It's a fairly new discipline, about 40 to 45 years old. However, it is quite well established in North America and Australia with a large number of projects, large number of practitioners, and there's fairly a good amount of funding going behind ecological restoration. It has also evolved into multiple branches and specializations. These are the branches of ecological restoration. There is research going on extensively. There is also people developing the science of restoration, people helping governments with policy formulation. There is educational efforts going on, practice of restoration, which is what people like me do on the ground. And of course, there is communication which is happening. The specializations, three types of specialization. One is process-based. You could talk about people specializing on seed-based restoration. It's a very lot of work happening on how to enhance seed-based restoration methods, and people working on assisted or facilitated natural regeneration. The ecosystem-based, like grasslands, people specializing grasslands. There are people specializing on very sophisticated restoration of challenges like coral reef restoration. And within these, there are sub-regional sub-classifications. So you could have people working on savannas in Africa, prairie grasslands in North America, etc. Degradation-based, you could have degradation caused by anthropogenic factors or invasive species, sometimes contaminated sites like chemical contamination or mining sites, etc. Standards have come up globally. One of the main standards is the International Principles and Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration. Is published by SCR. The second edition was published in 2019. It has not only principles, but also guidance on project management, monitoring tools, etc. There is a IUCN publication on restoration of protected areas, which is very useful. And there are guidelines for specific ecosystems like shellfish reefs or mangroves. There have been a few international conventions related to ecological restoration. The Bond Challenge, which is actually going on now, and it overlaps in a way with the UN Decade. There is the CBD, which set the Aichi targets, biodiversity targets, and of course the UN Decade that we're talking about now. Let's look at the UN Decade in the Indian context. India, as we know, is one of the most biodiverse regions in the world. It has almost 90% of the biogeographies represented in this region. There are multiple ecosystem types, and the challenges we face are in terms of very high population pressure on ecology. There are high developmental pressures, including infrastructural pressures, and of late, across India, there is also a major issue of invasive alien species. So all these put together is leading to a high degree of degradation. There are no specific numbers available as to how much of India's natural ecosystems are degraded. At a ballpark estimate, about 40 to 50% is degraded to various degrees. And therefore, there is urgent need for restoration in India. And as a result, we see that the ecosystem services are significantly impaired. And this is reflected in the natural disasters that we are seeing all around, and the huge landslides which happened a few years back in areas like Coorg. Then there have been cyclones which have caused quite a lot of havoc deep inland, 200, 300 kilometers from the coast, because our mangroves are degraded. So we are seeing that, and we see that the degradation of shola grasslands in the upper parts of the Nilgiris. There is an impact on the river water flow. So the multiple ecosystem services that we are seeing significantly impaired. Restoration is a relatively new discipline in India. As I said earlier, Gole sir started it along with his contemporaries around the globe. But after that, there has been a slowdown, and it has restarted maybe in right earnest in the last 10 to 15 years, or 20 years at most. We have not too many projects across the country which we can call genuinely as restoration projects. There are many projects which are in the nature of tree planting, cleaning up of rivers, etc., but they do not qualify as ecological restoration in the true sense. So there are not too many projects that qualify as ecological restoration in the true sense. The majority of them are not big projects. And simultaneously, it is important to note that the capacity for restoration is also low in terms of knowledge, skills, and the funding. So what are the key requisites for India to leverage on the event decade and make an impact? Firstly, we need a national policy on ecological restoration. Like any other activity, this is a very crucial activity, and it requires a policy framework. And the policy should cover the restoration vision for the country and the strategy. And the goals, both the medium and long-term goals, as Swati ji mentioned, it's a very long-term process, restoration. So we need both medium and long-term goals as part of the policy. How is the UN decade going to be rolled out in India at national and state levels? What are the roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders? And given that the state is going to be one of the main players in restoration, what are the steps to prevent further degradation? Because we cannot be restoring on one side and there is degradation happening on another side. So we need to simultaneously have steps to prevent further degradation. And how are we going to monitor the progress and measure the outcomes? As I said earlier, we do not have an inventory of degradation across the country, but it is very important to build degradation inventory. We have experience of building biodiversity registers, so it should not be very difficult to build degradation register on similar lines. It is impractical to expect people to build a degradation inventory of all ecosystems in the country, but we can start by covering key ecosystems which have high biodiversity value. And we need to distinguish the degree of degradation, whether it's moderately degraded, severely degraded, etc., and use standard degradation indicators across the country so that we have a uniform measurement of degradation. How do we map our restoration priorities to our ecological objectives? So do we have ecological objectives as a country as a whole? And then how do we map restoration priorities to this? I could think of three major ecological objectives. One is enhancement of key ecosystem services like water security, conservation of areas with high biodiversity value, and disaster mitigation. So assuming these are the key ecological objectives, there could be more definitely. Assuming these are three key ecological objectives, then we could map the restoration priorities as well, saying these are the key degraded ecosystems coming out of the degradation inventory that we need to prioritize or focus upon in the first 10 years. So in that way, because restoration is time consuming, restoration is also cost intensive in many cases. So we need to optimize the time and resources that we have. And for that, the prioritization is very important. Capacity building, again, is a very, very crucial aspect because we need to build the knowledge and skills required for implementing restoration projects. Otherwise, we are going to have a number of unscientific and ad hoc efforts, which actually can do more harm than good for our ecosystems. As I said earlier, people have been converting grasslands into woody forests, etc. There are three important aspects here. One is inclusion of restoration education as part of our academic curriculum. If you look at countries like, if you look at regions like North America or Europe or Australia, many universities offer undergraduate and postgraduate courses exclusively on ecological restoration. there is no undergraduate, postgraduate course on ecological restoration in India till now. Even premier institutions which teach forestry management or conservation of biology do not have ecological restoration as a subject. There are a few colleges which include ecological restoration as a separate paper under environmental sciences or some other topic, but there is no focused effort to educate people on ecological restoration. So that is a gap that needs to be filled urgently. We need training programs for field level personnel, including forest department personnel. And very importantly, we need to make sure that we leverage on the traditional ecological knowledge, which we have in abundance. We have a large indigenous community population in India. Many of them are still connected to the forest. Well, some of them have been moved away and moved to other occupations, but still there are fairly large number who still have a connect with the forest, and therefore their traditional knowledge is still not completely lost. So we need to leverage on the traditional ecological knowledge. In our work in Bandipur, we have benefited enormously by the knowledge of the indigenous communities, without which I don't think we could have done what we have tried to do till now. In terms of scaling up, we have to move from small and discrete projects or individual standalone projects to a more integrated effort at a landscape level. So how do we do this? We can leverage on existing best practices so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel again and again. Importantly, we need to create low cost and adaptable restoration models. Swati ji said adaptability is important, I recall that, but low cost is equally important because we are not a resource rich country. So we need to find low cost methodologies, and that is where methods like assisted natural regeneration are very important, because it is a low cost. You can restore 5 times the area with the same amount of money as you have compared to intensive methods. We need to integrate projects within a landscape. So if we are working in a Nilgiri biosphere, we need to find a way of integrating the various restoration projects within that particular landscape, so that we can draw synergies between the projects, and that overall multiplier effect is available to us. And we'll need to look at multiple funding options. Carbon funding is becoming very important now. We need to find how to leverage on carbon funding without losing the biodiversity aspect. Multiple stakeholder engagement becomes very important for the restoration agenda, because we need the support of various stakeholders, which includes policymakers, industry bodies, etc. We need the support of various stakeholders for ecological restoration. Actively engage local communities, because the sustainability of projects depends on the commitment of the local communities. Restoration also has very high livelihood potential, particularly in the rural areas. So we need to emphasize that this is going to be a driver of employment and a driver of rural economy. The role of ACR, I'll briefly cover 2 or 3 slides. ACR is the leading global body on ecological restoration. It was formed around 1979, 1980. It has over 4,000 members. There are chapters in 5 continents, actually all continents except Asia as of now. They're trying to form a chapter in Asia as well. It is focused on developing the science, the practice, and policies for ecological restoration. It is a global partner for the UN program. These are the various global partners for the UN program. ACR is one of them. ACR plays a key role in developing knowledge for restoration and also facilitating collaborations. So I talked about the international standards earlier, but if you go to the ACR website, you will find a number of other guidance materials, which is open source for anyone. So developing knowledge is a key activity. There are global conferences which are held once in 2 years. They are rotated between the various continents. So the last one before COVID was in Africa. The next one is going to be in Asia. So it's rotated amongst the continents so that people living in those areas have an opportunity to participate in person. But increasingly, it is becoming in person and virtual. There are regional conferences held by the various chapters. And there are also webinars which happen every month as part of for all the ACR members. Restoration Ecology is a journal, it's a peer-reviewed journal, which is focused on articles on ecological restoration, which is available free for all the ACR members. And there is also a restoration resource database, which contains more than 300 or 400 projects from around the world. I think the projects of Ecological Society also feature on the restoration database. Lastly, certification and training. ACR offers a certification for ecological restoration practitioners. There are 2 certificates. One is called the CERP, or the Certified Ecological Restoration Practitioner, and the other is called the CERPIT, which is Certified Ecological Restoration Practitioner in Training. So the only distinction is in training is for those people who do not meet the criteria for educational qualifications or a field experience. So they are called in training, and once they acquire those qualifications, they migrate to become a full-fledged restoration certified practitioner. SCR also has an online training module which is open source for everyone, called the Overview of the Practice of Ecological Restoration. It is about 2.5 hours and gives a very good overview of ecological restoration. And in 2019, SCR, along with a university in Pune and Junglescapes, we have started a foundation training program on the practice of ecological restoration. The second batch is ongoing now, and it is basically a 60-hour program consisting of both classroom and field sessions to give a foundational understanding and experience required for starting restoration projects on the right lines. So that is the role of SCR in certification and training. So that brings me to the close of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. It was really wonderful presentation, and within this short time, you have covered so many very key terms, and also many concepts are made clear. So yeah, I'm also feeling like maybe asking one or two questions, but I think let's hear Pradip first, and then I'll ask you a few questions. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ketaki.
Yeah, so over to Pradip.
Should I share my screen?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'm going to try and quickly run through the story of what we did in Jodhpur, beginning in 2006. And I think this story is important and perhaps interesting to a lot of your viewers because this was the first project that I was doing as someone who had set out to do some restoration. I was learning on the job. I was making mistakes. I was learning from my mistakes. And it was a really very, very important part of the journey for where I am now. Jodhpur, some of you will have visited. It's pretty much in the, slightly west of the Aravalis in sort of central Rajasthan. That little dot that you see in the map on the bottom right shows you where Jodhpur is. And Mehrangarh Fort is the big iconic fort that dominates the entire city because it's situated on top of an outcrop of volcanic rock over the city. Now, when we first came here and we were shown the area that they wanted developed, we were very impressed by the fact that this rock had a very, very distinctive character. It's called rhyolite, as well as welded tuff is a different form of rhyolite. But basically, this is all volcanic rock. Goes back to a time when, long before the Indian subcontinent had detached itself from the supercontinent and started traveling northwards. So the volcanic phase was about 750 million years old, but this is what, the entire hill was made up of rhyolite. And this is what it looked like when I was first shown this piece of land in 2005. I think it was in October or November. And pretty much all the green that you see in this picture is made up of Prosopis juliflora. Which we call, in Delhi, we call Vilaiti Kikar, and in Marwar, in Rajasthan, they call Bawlia. But notice how eroded the land is, and how there is almost a complete absence of soil throughout this area. Now, the first thing we tried to do when we were told that, we're going to give you this land to see what you can, how you can green it. The first question I actually asked them was, I said, we need to know what you mean when you want this land greened. I mean, do you see this as being a set of lawns with flowering trees and benches, a park-like atmosphere. Because if you do, then you're going to have to bring in several million tons of soil, literally. And I wasn't saying this loosely, but you would have to bring in massive quantities of soil, and you would have to water every single plant every single day for the rest of your lives, because this is a semi-arid place, with a rainfall of maybe 13 inches if you're lucky in a good year annually. And the people who basically run the fort, which is a trust, the fort works like a museum. And the reason they wanted the landscape around the fort greened was they saw it as a nice adjunct to the fort. And they said, well, when you put it like that, when you say that it's going to need watering, all of this soil, then obviously doesn't seem like a good idea. But what is the alternative? And I said, well, the alternative is to try and restore the natural ecology of this kind of rocky desert land. And what it's going to mean is that we're going to have to go out into the desert and look for other regions, other swathes of rocky country, and to look at and to study them and to understand what plants are growing there. And then we want to try and bring them into this land. So the pictures you see on the screen now basically are the only clues we got to what this land might have been like earlier. These were watercolors that had been done by an Englishman in the 1890s. And as we started exploring further, what we realized was that something big had happened in the 1930s. And when you compare these two pictures, you can see exactly what it is. It's basically the introduction of the Bavlia, of the Prosopis juliflora, because one of the Maharajas in the 1930s, somebody called Maharaja Umed Singh, was told by a forester that, look, if you want to green your arid desert kingdom, then the way to do it is to bring in this Mexican and South American plant, which grows very easily in rock. It's not particular about where it grows. It tolerates poor soils, skeleton soils. It'll tolerate salt in the ground, and it'll grow even in heavy rock. So Maharaj Umed Singh he used to pilot his own plane. And I like to think of him looking a little bit like Biggles with a leather sort of headdress and goggles, flying his own airplane with these hundreds and hundreds of bags of seeds of Prosopis juliflora and unloading them throughout his kingdom of Jodhpur, which you must remember is many times larger than the district of Jodhpur is today. The Jodhpur would have extended all the way to the borders of Gujarat. So that's what this land was like. It was just completely dominated by Prosopis juliflora. And quite frankly, when they first said to me, would you be able to green this land for us? And we said, I gulped a few times because it just seemed like such a daunting idea. First of all, to remove the Prosopis juliflora because of the rockiness of the land, and then to try and grow things in it. Now, these are just slightly closer pictures, just to show you to what extent Prosopis completely dominated, every aspect of this landscape. We started to try and find out what are the ways of eradicating this invasive plant. We had heard that Prosopis basically secretes an alkaloid in its root zone that inhibits other plants from growing close to it, and that's the reason for its success. And we also learned from the internet that you have to dig down a minimum of 3 feet below the level of the soil in order to eliminate the budding zones in the root from which it coppices and comes up again when you cut it. Now, the problem was, how do you do that in a rock that is much, much harder than sandstone, even harder than granite? We knew we didn't want to use anything toxic, no toxic chemicals. We knew we didn't want to spoil the landscape by using heavy earth machinery, even if it was possible to take heavy earth machinery there. And then somebody said, look, why don't you use the traditional miners of Marwar, the community called the Khandwalias? And this gentleman whose picture I have at the bottom right, a man called Dhan Singh, who died earlier this year, we called him and we said, Dhan Singh, I showed him a bush about 4 feet high, a precipice bush. And I said, can you dig down 3 feet and pull out at least the first 3 feet of roots of this plant? And he said, yeah, sure, no problem. And what these people do is they use an extremely heavy hammer and they tap the ground lightly at first. And then they turn their face to one side and they hit the ground hard 3 or 4 times. And, I assumed that what they were doing was they were just averting their eyes so that shards of the rock wouldn't go into their eyes. But what they were actually doing was they were listening to the sound of the hammer on the rock. And the sound gave them all the information that they needed to decide where to cut in from, at what angle to cut in, where the rock was kind of hollow and so on. I didn't notice at the time, but very quickly, these people showed us how skillful they were. And we hired 15 of them to go through the entire landscape of 70 hectares. The entire land was about 70 hectares, about 170 acres or so. And they eventually took 7 years to clear the whole land, plot, tree by tree, plot by plot. And we were basically planting every year only in the land that had been vacated by the precipice. And we also took a decision not based on anything except intuition in the very beginning, that we would only plant where precipice had shown us that it was possible for a plant to grow in this extremely hostile landscape where there was hardly any soil. So it's only in pits vacated by precipice that we were actually starting to plant. So this is the kind of landscape that we had. Sometimes you had broken rock on the top. Most of the plants that you're seeing in this particular picture, it forms a low heath-like, it's something called Barlaria acanthoides, the white Barlaria, but very, very difficult kind of landscape to plant in. Now, I'm just going to show you a few pictures to show you how very early on we were experimenting with trying to plant up one of these. They call them tekras in Marwadi, and tekra is probably a word that might even travel into Marathi and Gujarati. I'm not sure, but this was a rocky tekra, rhyolite tekra, and we wanted to see whether it was possible to actually work with the tekra to see whether we could plant in the little crevices in the rock, right? So this is just a few pictures to show you how over the first 2.5 years, we managed to grow things within a small microsite. And this is what actually gave us the confidence to branch out into a much bigger venture in this area. Then we discovered, also in year 2, we discovered this amazing grass that is called Oropitium. And Oropitium tomeum, which is the scientific name of this grass, is a grass that actually grows in partnership with a liverwort. You can see the liverwort, you can see the grass as little tufts, and you can see the layer of liverworts. They grow together and they tend to form a crust over existing soil, thereby preventing soil from blowing away and being eroded, but also making it possible for the surface of rock to be colonized by soil and for other plants to then colonize the rock. And we realized that this was one of the most important procedures by which in a rocky desert, the rock actually gets colonized. So we decided to try and use this. This is another picture that just shows you how in a little V in the rock, so the grasses that are growing on top are not Oropitium. These are all sort of different kinds of grasses, Aristidas and a few other ones. But if it wasn't for the for the rock grass, for the Oropitium, none of this would have been possible. There's another picture here which shows you how even in the dry season, when the Oropitium becomes dormant and the liverworts become dormant, they still manage to hold on to the rock and keep it intact. And here, this is a picture from, actually not from Marwar, but from somewhere else, when an entire rocky surface is covered by maybe 2 inches, 2.5 inches of soil that is held in place only by Oropitium. So it became a very, very important part. And, you know, these are things that are not normally available to us as people who are venturing into an area for the first time. So, you know, you're using a book. In this case, we were using a book by Professor M.M. Bhandari, who's written the definitive book about the flora of the desert. But floras tend to organize information according to phylogenetic, you know, about how they think plants would have evolved according to the families are arranged phylogenetically, right? So they don't give you much ecological information. All right, so this is now, I just want to show you how we first started planting up what became our first walk. So it's called a gully, but the gully is actually, you know, it's like a canal that was dug by hand 450 years ago in order to take water by gravity from the western hills into a lake at the bottom next to the fort. And we decided that we were going to make this into our first visitors walking trail. And therefore, we wanted to do a little extra planting here instead of, you know, treating it in the way that we were treating everything else here. So we started basically working with Oropitium and planting up in crevices here. And let me also say here that, you know, you've probably come across the term Chasmophytes. Chasmophytes are basically plants that grow in little cracks in rock. And we came to realize very quickly that it is the most important microsite that is possibly available, you know, anywhere in, you know, in a rocky landscape. What happens is that if you think of a narrow crack in the rock, the deeper the crack and the slimmer the crack, the less it's affected by dry air or by the sun. And therefore it retains its moisture much longer. And these are the places where a lot of these plants are actually growing. So we started taking advantage more and more of these little microchasms, if you like. Here you can see some of the people working with us, basically just putting slabs of Oropitium that also contains the liverwort on horizontal surfaces, which later became colonized, right? And then this is basically how that gully walk started to get, these pictures are spaced apart by about 4 years. So from this, it became this in the space of this, in this case, about 6 years. So, you know, for us, it was very encouraging because it gave us the sense that as long as you planted right, as long as you planted the right things in the right place, where in every case, only using plants that we've seen growing in rock. But we were still in the first 2 years, only getting something like 65–70% survival rates. And we knew we were not doing something right. And the information to course correct, the information to try and you know, push up our survival rates higher from 65% just wasn't available to us in any of the books that we could find. So we decided to keep tabs on our plants and number every single pit that we had, measure the depth of every pit. We were experimenting with 2 or 3 different kinds of planting mixes. So we would record what kind of planting mix was in each pit, what kind of plant we had planted in there, and what kind of site quality it had. And eventually, it yielded this kind of information that we basically put into Excel sheets. And when you did this on Excel sheets and you club together all the same species by organizing particular columns, you were getting this kind of information. Suddenly you began to see that all the Bordi plants, for example, are not going to do well unless they're planted in the deeper pits and not in pits that are only like 3 feet or 3.5 feet deep. And we began to get information not about everything, but suddenly the water demands and the site, you know, the microsite demands of many of these plants began to swim into focus. Here are a few more pictures of how some of these landscapes developed. The picture top left shows you the site when it still was filled with precipice. Flora, all the precipice was removed. The picture on the bottom right shows you some neem trees that had existed within the precipice, but been suppressed by the precipice. So they were there, they were not new plants, they were probably quite old plants, but they were not allowed to grow up because of the action of the alkaloids that precipice secretes. So all the dark green trees you see here were the neem trees that had been suppressed. Unfortunately, the water expanded, and here on the bottom right, you can actually see the neem trees dead because the neem trees can't stand water in their root zones. But this is basically how the landscape developed in the space of something like 10 years, 11 years, right? Now, I'm going to introduce you because you're probably quite curious about some of the plants that you get in the desert and what are the kinds of plants that we're using and what are they like to work with. Plants that grow in rock are called lithophytes, right? They're plants that have evolved to be adapted to growing in rock. And one of the key trees, one of the most important trees that we learned to see as a lithophyte was the Acacia senegal, which also is capable of growing in sandy places, but it loves growing in, you can see the picture on the top left, it's actually growing in a crack in the rock. Another really important lithophyte is this succulent plant that people often mistakenly call a cactus, but actually is a cactoid euphorbia. This is the Euphorbia Caducifolia, which only grows in rock. It's an amazing plant. It doesn't have a deep root system at all. It wouldn't be much use to have a deep-rooted system. Basically, has a little thread-like roots that multiply and become very, very extensive, but they're not deep at all. And obviously, like a cactus, it stores moisture in its in its branches. Then there is the tree that is called Anogeissus pendula, or the dhok tree in Rajasthan. All the dry trees that you're seeing that with a little bit of leaf, not the ones that are leafless, but the ones that look a little purplish, are made up of Anogeissus pendula, which is a habitat specialist in the sense that it's the only tree that manages to grow on steep rocky slopes in the Aravallis. And it has a lot of mysteries attached to it. Nobody understands why it grows only on the Aravallis and on a tiny bit of the Vindhyas where it crosses the Aravallis. Nobody understands what it is that enables it to live in on steep slopes where water doesn't stay, because it doesn't have a deep root system, nor is it succulent. And these are the two attributes that usually allow a plant to survive in rocky areas. And yet this is the plant that actually, if you go to the Aravallis, it dominates the Aravallis and becomes almost like a monoculture, like you can see in this photograph. This is when it's put on new leaves early in the monsoon. And so now we use dhok for all our little gullies within the park, and it does really well in the park. This is another very interesting tree, a relative of Anogeissus pendula. And like Anogeissus pendula, this forms clonal forests. Now, just to explain for those people who may not know what a clonal forest is that if you look at all these trees, they all look like separate individual trees. The chances are that they're all linked underground by runners so that they are actually all the same tree. They all have the same identical DNA. They are one tree. They're not separate trees. And a lot of plants do this in arid ecosystems, in arid areas, where it's very, they can't count on their seeds germinating easily. So it's easier for them to send runners underground and for a new tree to appear, or what looks like a new tree, actually it's only an offshoot of another tree. So this became very exciting to discover this tree. And this tree unlike Anogasis pendula, lives in calcium nodular soil near what are called nadis in the desert, where you get, seasonal stream beds, as you can see in this picture. This is another picture of the same tree of Anogasis nummularia, when it actually does have a full canopy and hasn't been lopped by shepherds. There is the care tree. The care is another fantastic desert tree that tends to be leafless for about 10.5 months in the year. That's why it's called Capparis decidua, because it's deciduous in the sense that it hardly has leaves. And this is when you see it at its most eye-catching moment, when it has flowers. Then you get, so for, basically the work we did early on when we first starting is to actually scour the desert in trying to understand the different kinds of rocks and the different ways in which plants adapt to growing in rocky conditions. We're also beginning to understand how the rocks change. And, so for example, the picture on the top left here is an iron-rich sandstone, which is very different from the rocks that we have in Rajodha Park in Jodhpur. So understanding that there are, that the soil that degrades from particular kinds of rocks don't always add up to what you can use for your plants. This became a really important lesson. These are some other kinds of calcium-rich soils, for example. This shows one of our nursery people actually gathering plants from loose gravel at a mining site, which is something we did quite a lot of. And then you get these hamadas, or these sort of plains with smashed broken rock that look like they're completely barren, but actually they are repositories of wonderful little plants that come up in the rains and don't last very long. But they are the most successful strategy for a plant in the desert is to live only for a short time when there is moisture in the ground. So if you go to the desert at this time, like where this picture is shown, it would just look as if there's no life here, but actually it's full of life. And at certain times of the year, it's also full of plants. So, I mean, this is an example of a particular kind of Blepharis, which you see only in rocky conditions, at a particular time of the year. This is another favorite desert plant of mine, not something that grows in rock, but grows in sandy places. Caligonum, which is now severely endangered because the roots burn at a very, very high temperature, and therefore goldsmiths and ironsmiths, they value the roots very much, and you see cartloads of these trees. These are climax trees of sand dunes. They're perfectly adapted to slightly salty sand dunes, but they're all going. This is a picture of the same plant, but entire areas that are completely dominated by this tree because it does so well on these sand dunes, these shifting sand dunes. I want to talk very briefly about some of the work we did, trying to, if you can imagine us going into the desert, looking for seeds, trying to understand other rocky places, you come across plants that will not grow in your park because you don't have the right soil, you don't have the right minerals, right? So what we decided to do was to see whether we could create little, artificial places like raised beds to raise plants like this. So this is the back of our visitor center, where we made these raised beds with. So we would go to a particular area, we would collect the soil from that area. We would also collect seed-bearing soil, just the top, scrape the top, and put it into these raised pits, and then wait for the monsoon. And you can see the pits at the back and how all of them, just basically with the rains, all the seeds germinated, and we just had the most beautiful exhibit of different kinds of soil that you get in the desert. But we could never take this and expand it because these things will only grow where the right soil actually is. Okay, now I'm going to change the topic slightly and sorry, these are all pictures for what we call the colors of the desert, which is the raised beds. This is what the landscape looked like about this photograph was taken about 2 years ago. So it's taken, 2 years ago is roughly 13 years after we began working in the desert. And that's basically how long it takes. It takes a long time in the desert, partly because our growing season is very short, partly because we have severe shortages of water and rainfall. But one of the things we learned to do was, if you couldn't make this sustainable, there was no point doing this. So we would do all our planting early in the rains, and we would start weaning plants off water by December or January of the year in which they were planted. And then after that, if we saw a plant that was dying for want of water, it was clearly the wrong plant in the wrong place, and we would let it die and replace it with something else that was going to survive. And that became a principle that was very, very important to everything that we did in this landscape. So I just want to show you a few pictures of what this landscape, this picture was taken last year from a drone to show you what the park looked like next to the fort. This is the same as this area, but taken in the dry season when a lot of the leaves are shedding. So, and for us, it was very important to see how these plants would actually survive in the dry season, because we're not watering at all. This was the visitor center that we started adapting in 2011, because we knew we wanted by this time to start inviting visitors in and sending them into the park with naturalists. This was the little garden that we created other than the neem tree that is, whose leaves are coming in from the top. All of this was native desert plants growing in very, very shallow soil. And this was just some of the interpretation that we were doing for visitors, for people to tell them, how plants manage in rock and so on. Now a whole plethora of signage, of booklets, of information that is available to people who come to Rao Jodha Park. Now, am I going on too long, Ketaki? Do I need to wind up? Because I've got maybe just...
No. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a subset, a slightly new subject to get into.
Okay.
Which is in 2015, I was offered a palace in a place called Nagaur, behind which there were these old rectangular planting pits. And they said, would you plant this up? And I said, look, this is not what I do. I'm not into, planting ornamentally. And the lady who was funding this, who happened to be an English woman, said, well, I don't care what you say. I want you to do it. And I said, well, I'll do it if you allow me to plant only native plants here. And it'll be an experiment. It'll be very interesting. And she said, I'll allow you to plant native plants if you promise me that they will flower in February, because that's when we have the Sufi festival in Nagaur. And I said, sorry, I can't do that. It's not possible to get my plants to flower when you want them. But finally, she agreed. And so this was an experiment of actually using native desert plants, bringing in soil that was relevant to those plants. And then I've just got a few slides to show you what happened. This was in year one, the end of year one after the rains, when we just started to plant it up. This was in year 3, by which time we had, a particular, so this particular pit, for example, we dug down 8 feet and brought in 3 truckloads of sand from near the border with Pakistan, where Pog or Caligonum grows. And again, by just taking the top layer of soil, and that had all the associate plants of the Caligonum, which is why you got this amazing, now this didn't look particularly formal, and there were, I knew that the people who who do the festival and who own the fort were not particularly happy with something that looked a bit, so informal. So we also did some other kinds of planting like this, again, using only desert plants. And this was a big hit with them, because they thought that this satisfied all their need for, for formality in a garden like this. So I just wanted to show this to you because this was interesting. So this is Abamel that I'd written about. I've just finished a garden, a park in Jaipur, which is 60 hectares. And this is these are sand dunes, basically sand dunes that are blocked by a hill in northern Jaipur city. And this has become a park now. But I'm going to close now, and I'm very happy to answer questions if there are any, and to participate in any discussion that we may have. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pradip. It was a wonderful presentation and a beautiful journey.
Thank you.
We could just witness the entire restoration process. Yeah, so I think let's take question and answers, and because there's one question which is relevant to you immediately.
Sure.
Was this Prosopis juliflora, when was it introduced? So when you started this project, so when was it? So the question is, what was the original vegetation on Mehrangarh Fort? Was it Prosopis before Prosopis juliflora? And when was it introduced?
No, so I showed you a picture from the 1890s, which was the watercolor by an Englishman, and that shows vegetation in which you can recognize the Euphorbia Caducifolia, because that has that very cactus-like candelabra shape. You can also perhaps recognize Acro, the Calotropis, but nothing else. Everything else was generic, so you couldn't tell what it was. It was not obvious from those watercolors. We also looked at miniatures, and there's a whole feast of miniatures, the Rajput paintings that are available in the archives. But again, they tended to be generic. You couldn't really make out what there was, although the rhyolite was always shown very distinctively as red sort of dollops in the landscape. Very interesting. But so we had so the only clue we had about what was growing here was by looking at other places. You mentioned, I think Mrs. Gole mentioned a reference site. Very, very important in all rewilding or restoration projects, to find a reference site that matches the same soil and the same minerals and the same moisture regime as yours, because that gives you the native species. That gives you the native species, not just in terms of trees, but in terms of shrubs and grasses. Grasses were really, really important to us. We have something like 70 species of grasses, which we're watching competing with each other, and we're taking notes, and we're learning about how, which grass dominates and which grass shrinks. So, is a shrinking violet, and is, it's very, very interesting. So to answer your question, Prosopis was introduced in the 1930s by this aerial broadcasting, and we don't really know what else there was in this area earlier.
Oh, thank you so much. So there is one more related question to this. Maybe both you and Ramesh can answer this.
Yeah.
So how long it typically takes to replace invasive flora with native flora? So
yeah, so I'm sure Ramesh will have something interesting to say about this, but in the desert, as I said, the desert is very, very slow. I've worked in the desert, but I've also worked in other places. I've worked in the foothills of the Himalaya, where it's amazingly fast, because you have much richer soils and you have much more intense rainfall. Things happen very, very quickly. You can actually get appreciable results even in 1 year. Here you're talking of maybe it's 10 times slower or 12 times slower. It's very, very slow. But I don't think there's a rule of thumb. I think there'll be a continuum and rainfall and soil are the two variables that are, moisture and soil are the two most important variables there.
Right. So to answer Srirang, this time period completely depends on which ecosystem you are. So like last year, we've started one grassland restoration project in Solapur. So over there, it was complete invaded by one species of Malvaceae and Parthenium, usual one. So
Yeah.
over there, we got removed it last year completely. And this year, hardly 5% came up. So just within one monsoon, good result. We could get good results. Yeah. So Ramesh, you wish to add anything?
Yeah, I agree with what Pradip said. There is no rule of thumb here. And some of the invasive species are more persistent than the others. So we work in an area with species like Lantana camara, Senna spectabilis, which are very highly persistent, and it takes roughly 5 to 7 years. And it also depends on the approach that we take. As we keep increasing the area under restoration, the vulnerability of the area to invasive species reduces. So we are going to do small plots here and there. They get reinvaded very quickly. But if we can do a large contiguous area, then the protection levels are much higher. It also depends on the remnant native vegetation in that area. So if there's good remnant native vegetation, we see very fast recovery. But in areas where completely dominated by invasive species, the recovery is much longer. It takes longer.
I want to add something. You know, there's a new project to restore the original ecology of the ridge on the central ridge in Delhi. And there's a gentleman called Professor C.R. Babu, who is, I think, the favorite biologist of the Delhi government and the central government in Delhi, who gets hired to do all of this. And I was asked to be on a committee to oversee the project. And I was horrified that, first of all, he's not removing the Prosopis juliflora, when Prosopis juliflora actually constitutes, I would say, 90 to 95% of the trees on the central ridge. So what he intends to do is to actually lop the major branches, and in the hope that somehow the tree is going to die when climbers climb up and strangle the tree. This is according to him. He's also wanting to completely alter the moisture regime with anicuts and with dams and with water bodies and with ponds. And we tried to say to him, why do you need to do this? You know, because all the trees that are, and you see, the central ridge has a long history going back to, I would say, going back to 1912 or so, soon after Delhi first became the capital city, when the forest department, under the British, basically planted 9 or 10 species of trees, none of which were native to the ridge. And the minute they withdrew irrigation, all these trees perished. And it's only Prosopis juliflora, which was introduced maybe 5 years later, that has done as well as it's done, and it's basically outcompeted everything else. So it's it's a case where a lot of the restoration work that is being, or the so-called restoration work that's being done, especially by the forest department, is completely misguided. Completely misguided. I'm very, very dismayed. I was asked to be on a Zoom meeting with some other scientists because they wanted to talk about the government's bond challenge commitment, which is to restore 21 million hectares of degraded forest under the bond challenge. Later, Prime Minister Modi increased this to 26 million hectares. And I thought the meeting was about beginning to talk about how to start to do this. But the note that was circulated by the Ministry of the Environment said, yes, we are going to do this, but we've already done 9 million hectares. And I said, really? But where? And with what species? And in what biomes? And in what ecologies? And till today, I've never got a reply to this, And it's very, very worrying, because some of the answers that I've got from other people is that, the government is actually claiming that some of the plantations they've done along roads constitutes ecological restoration and part of what they have agreed to do under the bond challenge. And if this is the kind of whitewashing that the government is going to be doing, it's very, very dismaying. I just wanted to raise that because it's, I'm sure Ramesh has also seen some of that or heard of some of that. But it's at the moment, the Indian government and the forest department live in a regime of compensatory afforestation, which is almost the opposite of ecological restoration.
Yeah, very true, Pradip. So when it comes to government's roles and what they're doing and what not, I think it's long discussion that can happen. So yeah, so Swapnil Chowdhury is asking, is Prosopis reappearing in the landscape?
So Prosopis would only reappear if cattle and goats and camels and donkeys had eaten the pods and had free access to this area. I'm sure that in places like where Ramesh is working in Bandipur, it's probably an issue because you will have ungulates, having eaten the pods, and basically the seeds have very hard coats, and they get softened by passing through the stomach and the intestines of these animals, and that's what actually makes the seeds completely ready to germinate. So if this process doesn't happen, you won't get Prosopis. So we've had no Prosopis coming back at all within Rajodha Park because we have walls. But where you don't have walls, it is obviously an ever-present danger.
Yes, thank you so much, Pradip. Yeah, so I'll just pose one question to Ramesh, again by Swapnil. Swapnil Chowdhury is also one of Ecological Society students and working in Nepal on various restoration projects. So he's asking, several policy and practice interventions were promoted through Manarega and such schemes. So how can ecological restoration principles be integrated into such interventions? This is one question, Ramesh. And second question, is there any official engagement of ACR with the government of India? You're on mute.
Sorry. To answer the first part,
Yeah.
Manrega is basically an employment generation scheme, as we know, and it is used for various projects like road repair or deepening of village ponds, etc. I have not seen many examples of Manrega funds being used for a proper ecological restoration. And as Pradip said, there's hardly much proper ecological restoration happening in the public sector or government space. So it is largely used for maybe removing some invasives on the roadside, creating fire lines in the forest, deepening village ponds, etc. Same applies to Campa. There's a huge amount of Campa money, which is called afforestation, but it does not go for ecological restoration. But the quantum of money in Campa is so massive that it can be deployed very effectively for ecological restoration.
So are you trying for that anywhere?
It is not easy because it goes through a lot of processes for getting released, etc. So as a non-profit, we cannot try and get that money. It is up to the forest department to get that money and utilize it properly. Now, as far as ACR engaging with Indian government, as of now, no, there is no engagement with the Indian government. There are a few governments in South America they are engaging with, but not in Asia.
Okay, thank you. And just to answer maybe a little differently, Swapnil, so the next session, which is happening on 6th Feb, that time we have Dr. Nevadkar who would talk about, they have used Manarega funds in Dhule and tried to restore a grassland. So though it was for fodder, though it was not meant for ecological restoration as such, but definitely outfall of that project is ecological restoration of the grassland ecosystem over there. So I think in the next session, we can talk a little detail. So whatever little few projects are there, we can talk about it. Yeah. And then one more question is there. I think, Ramesh, you can answer that from Praveen. I lost the question. Yeah. So Praveen Bhagwat, again, one of our friend, and also we worked on his land. He's doing very big work through his 14 Trees Foundation. He's asking that it will be good to hear the panelists' reflection on Miyawaki method. What are its implications in the Indian context? Yeah, so all of us can answer for sure, but we'll start with you, Ramesh.
Miyawaki is a very interesting concept. I believe that Miyawaki is okay if you want to create a green space within a city very quickly. But to assume that Miyawaki, what they say is that mimics nature or mimics a forest, It hardly mimics a forest, because in a forest you don't find some 300 plants growing in a 100 by 100 feet area, and you don't try to dig up the forest 3 feet on the ground and fill it up with various nutrients and then plant under. And first of all, in a forest, all species don't grow in a small area, as you know. They grow in clusters. They have microhabitats, so each species grows in a particular soil climatic zone. So all plants don't grow everywhere. Where in Miyawaki, you're trying to pack like maybe 50 or 60 species in a small 100 by 100 square feet plot. So I am not a great fan of Miyawaki. A lot of money, good money, is going down the drain through Miyawaki. We can do that. We have had people, excellent people, creating parks in urban areas much before Miyawaki came into place. We've had excellent gardeners for centuries. So we don't have to do Miyawaki if you want to do quick green cover creation.
Yeah, we think the same, I think. And so maybe if at all you wish to create, maybe it is doable only in cities. Instead of making lawns, we say, and gardens, at the most you can create a Miyawaki belt. That's
but even then, Ketaki, I'm sure you can do it at a far lower cost than Miyawaki.
Yeah, that's for sure. But many times it happens. So that's why I'm comparing it to some expensive garden. Instead of that, maybe creating such kind of native forest is a
No, but see,
not a bad idea.
I have something to say, Ketaki, here.
Yeah, please.
You know, I suspect that, you know, Miyawaki derives from a coniferous forest where things grow very close to each other, where there's almost no light at the middle level and the lower levels. And I'm sure it works very well in Japan. It's completely inappropriate to us.
Absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
The examples I've seen are very unimpressive. I call it a small capitalist's wet dream. You know, if I have a small factory and 10 yards between the edge of my factory and the wall, and I want a green wall to look out on, okay, fine, do it, But for municipalities to do it in gardens and all, I find completely inappropriate,
And also not appropriate to do it on larger areas. So for that, I think landscape ecological restoration is the only good answer.
So again, it needs to have a reference system, I mean, if you're doing, if you're trying to recreate a rainforest, thick with trees and lianas and plants in a rainforest, then by all means, use Miyawaki if you like, although it's a very expensive way of doing something quite simple. But to do it outside a rainforest makes no sense at all.
True. And now in Indian context, we have heard that there are some different problems altogether. Like, because it's so dense, reptiles are going inside, and the snakes and rodent population is increasing like anything, and predators are not able to maybe go behind them. So it's just the 1 or 2 species are increasing. So that's also something that we need to look at, that it's not ultimately a balance of all the populations, but yeah. So
I was taken to look at a Miyawaki forest about 60 kilometers from Jodhpur by an agency that had bought all their plants from our nursery, and they said, we've brought all our plants, so we come and look and see what we've done. But I was very, very disappointed to see what they've done. It's it wasn't good looking. It didn't correspond to anything else that you might see in nature. It was not, I mean, it didn't on any of the, on any count, it just wasn't worth the effort.
And again, here, I think I would like to talk about Gole sir's, the lesson that we learned from him. So he used to say there is a 3 points key. Whenever you wish to do any new thing, or if you wish to adopt, he would say there are 3 things you need to check. So the first thing is that any new, whatever activity, it should mimic nature. So if at all it is mimicking nature, you can adapt to it. Then you need to think about non-human beings. So here in Miyawaki, it happens that we are only thinking about human beings many times because we want greenery. So we're not thinking about all the other things that are maybe thought in a processes like restoration. And he also said the third point is we need to think about future generations. Yeah, so if at all we look at any activity from this key, I think that answers that any new activity which we feel is a good concept for sure for that particular country, but it may not be, you can't apply it as it is here in completely different context. Maybe like in case of Prosopis juliflora, for example, when it was introduced here in deserts. So that time the so-called goal was really idealistic, that we maybe stop this desert formation or say extinction of deserts. But that time, whatever, the officers and the researchers never thought that what implications it would bring maybe 50 or 100 years later. So as well, we learn lessons from all such activities which were done under the name of green activities. And I think there are now enough experiments which are being done by many different people, and we learn from it and then look at maybe things like Miyawaki little more conservatively, I feel.
All I'm hoping, Ketaki, is that at least a fraction of the money that goes into Miyawaki can come to
restoration.
Proper restoration. We can do a lot.
Yeah, we hope. And within that money, actually, you can restore larger landscapes, much larger landscape. So here, I think before we go towards the end summary, I just wish to talk about this book, Restoration of Nature by Gole sir. So many of the things that both Ramesh and Pradip have talked, basically the theory of restoration, he has narrated in a very fantastic way. Almost everything is covered about ecological restoration process. He has given certain guiding principles. And in just one simple small table, he narrates the entire process of restoration, right from referring to any site as a reference ecosystem to restoring ecological integrity, which Ramesh very rightly pointed out, then restoring natural structures and functions and certain processes, even microcosm like kind of thing that Pradip talked. And basically it's all about creating microhabitats, improving maybe strata, and having very keen observations that we actually witnessed in the presentation of Pradip, that if at all you look at floral management very keenly, and the same point brought by Ramesh, that many times that's the difference in conservation biology and ecological restoration, that conservation biology basically focuses on fauna and maybe conservation and management for all glamorous species, but in ecological restoration, you look at all smaller floral species and of course strata. And the same point I think stressed in Pradip's presentation, and very beautifully we could see that how desert ecosystem responds to this kind of ecological restoration. And while actually I was looking at this presentation, Pradip, we realized that such a great effort in desert where rainfall is so meager and also strata is so hard as compared to the projects. So now I'm feeling, Mansi, the kind of work we're doing in Western Ghats is quite easy as compared to the deserts for sure. Yeah, so it's a wonderful presentation. So Ajay, you wish to read out any important questions for both of them, or any actually?
One of the important questions has been raised, which asks about restoration efforts. Many times soil biodiversity and soil health are not sufficiently considered. And I think you already talked about an example of how these parameters are important. Probably CAT joined later, but if you can just very quickly in a couple of sentences provide an answer in terms of the examples of soil restoration leading to better, wider land and ecological restoration.
So just to answer very quickly, all the efforts that we're talking, so even Ramesh talked about the same, even in case of Pradip, in case of Panchayat Ecological Society's project, and even our project. So wherever we do, we start with soil restoration. The moment you do protection, you offer protection for initial 1 or 2 years, topsoil layer improves, just because all the biomass which otherwise get burnt or grazed is going into the topsoil and texturizing it. So the moment topsoil texturization happens, microbes start coming in the soil, they start colonizing because there is ample food for them. So in any restoration project, by default, the moment you offer protection, it improves soil.
And I think that in any restoration project, first thing is physical structure improvement. So unless you do that, the next stage of biological structure improvement won't happen, because biological structure is ultimately dependent on various parameters of whatever is there in the strata. Like in case of Rao Jodha, where the soil was hardly any or hardly available, So there the strata, which was rock, which is very hard, but with cracks and various opportunities for different plants to colonize was used. So that's the basic of any restoration process, that first you have to improve the physical structure and then go towards the biological structure. If the physical structure is improved properly by using various parameters, like if it is soil or if it is rock, then the next layer is pretty predictive, I would say. So that is very important when we talk about soil moisture, because plants, they don't grow just on the soil water, but they require soil moisture.
Right. And I think just to add one piece where soil microbiome is also quite important, and that once you create a habitat, that would also grow and support restoration. Another question.
Sorry, can I add one little thing
Sure, sir.
to this? You know, in year 3 or 4 of beginning to work in the desert, I happened to meet a man by accident who began to talk to me about mycorrhiza in the soil, and especially in the desert. And over the years, I've realized that, you know, we are probably only standing at the tip of knowing about what is happening in the microbiome that you're talking about. You know, we will probably look back 20 years from now and say, "Arey, hum us waqt to kuch nahi jante the," you know. But it's very, very interesting to know about, you know, to read about mycorrhiza and how, you know, plants basically communicate with each other and make nutrients available to each other. You know, especially when you actually have a fungus that is being able to lap minerals from a rock that is unavailable to a plant. So that's a whole area that I think we're only just beginning to learn about, but it's very, very interesting. Yeah.
Wonderful book about this hidden life of.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, gorgeous book. Yeah.
Jay.
Yeah, then there is another question for both Pradip and Ramesh to comment. So this question reads, thanks, fascinating efforts in Rajasthan. Have there been any interactions with the municipal garden departments in Jodhpur, Jaipur, and is there any interest in the restoration of native biodiversity in the other public open areas or gardens? How could we promote these with city governments? So,
okay, I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about the Jaipur project because it's just opened. I was invited to Jaipur in 2016 by the Jaipur Development Authority because the chief minister had gone to Jodhpur, seen the park, and said, "Us aadmi ko bulao aur yahan kuch karo Jaipur mein uske saath." So the JDA put me in a car with 4 horticulturists and they spun me around the city. And they said, "ये देखो हमारा Central Park है, ये इसको आप कर सकते हैं, और ये देखो ये King Edward Park है, ये कर सकते हैं." And they showed me all their parks. And I said, "भैया हमको आपके parks में बिल्कुल भी कोई भी रुचि नहीं है, कोई interest नहीं है." So they said, "सारे parks तो हमने आपको दिखा दिए ना, what is it that you want to see?" And I said, "Don't you have some little part of your city that is degrading, that is unraveling?" And they said, "हाँ, ऐसे तो बहुत जगह हैं." So they took me to a place where, well, they first took me to one place that I wasn't interested in. And then they took me to a second place that happened to be called Kishenbag, which is a little bit like my surname, although it's not exactly like my surname. And basically it was a place where monsoon winds blowing in from the west carried tiny little grains of sand, which piled up at the base of a set of hills called Nahargarh. And then water flowing off the Nahargarh hills created channels through this piled up sand. So you had a whole bunch of what are called obstruction dunes in the northern part of the city that was too extensive to clear. And I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful to try and restore these dunes, but also to try and make it instructional for the city. So actually create a park where you tell people about desert plants and about dunes and about, you know, shrublands as a climax, where it's not forests, it's not trees, but it's, you know, shrubs. And that's what we've done. And throughout the time that we were doing it, the JDA was puzzled by what we were doing. They said, "Aap kya kar rahe hain? Yahan kaun aayega?" we don't understand how it's, but we've opened literally last week. And I got a call today saying, look, we've had 1,600 people coming into the park in one day today, and we don't know how to handle them.
Wow.
So it's something has caught people's imagination. We've done a lot of interpretation and spent a lot of time and energy trying to create interpretation that is engaging, doesn't talk down to people, is not difficult. It's just very simple, but it opens out new things especially for young people, and it's worked. So I'm very happy about the Jaipur park. I've been invited to do some more work in Jodhpur by the Jodhpur JDA, but I probably would not going to do it. So yeah, I think that things like this can spark interest. But the trouble is that government doesn't have the suppleness to do these things well themselves. And lots of things about the way government departments work mean that, you really have to have a very special relationship with them to make it work. It's not easy at all.
Yeah, thanks. Ramesh, you wish to address that?
Ketaki, I think I call it that there is a need for ecological evangelism. And there is so much of ignorance about biodiversity. Less said about ecological restoration, the better. Very few people understand it. Very few people understand biodiversity itself. So we need to go on a very large campaign of talk. And the problem with conservationists is we are talking within our own circles. So we are talking to the converted. We need to talk to the people who are not converted more and more, so that they understand the value of biodiversity and the value of ecosystems as a whole. And that is a very urgent need. Otherwise, policymakers are ignorant about biodiversity and how ecosystems work. And therefore, we're going to have policies which are more aligned with climate change mitigation, which is going to lead to more and more planting of trees in areas where they should not be planted.
Correct.
Yeah. So in line with this, Praveen is asking that are any dialogues planned with government policymakers or forest department leadership to influence their plan for meeting even all this conventional bond challenge target or any grand vision? Yeah. And even Amit is asking one of
So
ecological.
the Supreme Court set up a expert committee in August of last year, to look at ways to prevent the diversion of forest land for infrastructure and so-called development, but also to restore land that had been degraded. And luckily, I was part of this group, and the report is finished today.
Oh.
Today's a big red letter day. So it's a 250-page report under the chairmanship of Dr. Ranjit Singh, who was responsible for the Wildlife Protection Act of 72 as well. So ecological restoration forms a very, very important part of this report. And it's aimed, it's basically commissioned by the Supreme Court and given to the Supreme Court. And it's very critical of the way government functions and the way the procedures happen. And basically it recommends that the whole compensatory forestation regime be swept away and to be replaced by ecological restoration. But it's more complex than that, but I just want to give you the news, and that's it's good news.
So will that report be available eventually?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Ketaki, I saw a related question saying large parts of natural areas are under the control of the forest department. So how do we make large-scale restoration possible? I think we need to start by having ecological restoration as part of the training at the Wildlife Institute of India. I spoke to a senior person there saying you should have it as a subject for the IFS trainees. But he said, no, what is about ecological restoration? Everybody knows about it. And then I said, this conversation is not going anywhere. So I left it at that. He's a senior scientist there. So, unless IFS officers are going to get trained on the principles of restoration, it is not going to happen.
I agree with that completely, Ramesh. That's very much part of what we've said as well in our report, that that the ICFRE has to make it an important part of the way in which our IFS officers are trained, and also in the way in which all of their reports, all of their management plans are made. But it's true, the Forest Department at the moment has no clue about restoration. The Forest Department does not even raise their own native species in their own nurseries. You'd be lucky if you saw more than 6 or 7. I remember walking into a government nursery in Rajasthan, sorry, in MP about 6 months ago, and I said, "आपके पास कोई यहाँ के जो कुदरती native trees हैं क्या?" They said, "हाँ साहब, jungle jalebi है हमारे पास." So I said, "Jungle jalebi is American. It's not even Indian." They said, "No, naam jungle hai. How can it be an exotic?"
We have little better picture, I think, in Maharashtra, and specifically in Pune. Pune, Nashik, Mumbai. Here, all forest nurseries now they've completely shifted to natives.
But
Both is available.
But both of you have played a very big role in.
Yeah, we've been like pushing them.
Yeah, I mean, so you need to take the credit for that, really.
No,
I mean,
it's fine, but they are willing for sure. Means at least rest as compared to rest of the India here, and maybe it's also because there are few friends in department.
Yeah, so it's happening on a.
They are gone. We are not sure what's going to happen. Anyways, yeah. So Ramesh, there is one question from Amit. What is Indian government doing towards UN decade of ecological restoration?
I have seen the Bond Challenge undertakings which Pradip mentioned a while back. I have not seen much of, what shall I say, notifications about the UN decade as yet. Yeah, we are trying to talk, at least where we are working in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, we are talking to the forest departments saying, please become flag bearers for the UN decade.
And Ramesh, there was one more question. If you can very quickly provide an outline of ACR program and your collaboration with Pune University. You mentioned that, but would be nice to know a little bit more.
Yeah, this is with the BNCA college in Pune that we are running this program called the Foundation Training Program on the practice of ecological restoration. It is a 60-hour program, which is about 24 hours of classroom, which is done online, and 36 hours of field experience. There are more than one field location so that people from across India can participate. So this is the second batch that we are running. The first batch was in 2019-20. So each batch has about 20 people participate. So that is the nature of the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ajay, you wish to add anything?
Yeah, I think we are pretty much, we have covered most of the important questions. And
I think and if there are some more questions, then we can answer them offline. So
yes. In fact,
or
feel
emails
free
or
to
something.
send out these questions to us, and we'll be more than happy to provide pointers or answers, whatever is.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to respond on email or whatever if people want to.
That would be so nice. Madam, you wish to comment?
Madam, you're on mute.
So very wonderful presentation from both Ramesh and Pradip. So I'm so happy to have such a rich discussion and rich questions and answers. So it's a really good tribute to Sir.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, because I can see so many terms that we always used to hear from him in the classes. The same terms and processes are being narrated by many different people, and it's definitely a good sign, I feel. So
I would request Ketaki that I was trying to buy the hard copy, but hard copy not available online.
No, I'll send it to you. Don't worry.
It's not about me alone. It's not about me alone.
Okay.
There is only an e-book available on one of the portals, which is not very user friendly.
Yeah.
So I think you should go for more reprints. It is a very important book.
Yeah, Ketki, this is the Ecological Society's publication. I think we should make it public.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
we'll try to do that. We'll try to do that.
Yeah, so lastly, then just to summarize, and then I'll hand over to Santosh, Gauri, or anyone. So it was
So,
really
Ketaki,
wonderful.
before you summarize, one request I have to all the registered participants is this particular session has been recorded and it will be available on Ecological Society YouTube. So feel free to forward to all your concerned friends, all your networks where people are interested in this subject. We would like to reach as much and as much as possible and spread this message. So make sure that happens, and that will be bigger success of this program. All yours, Ketaki.
Yeah. So yeah, so very rightly narrated by Ramesh, the first point he made is why restoration is necessary and why conservation is just not enough, because just conservation obviously is time taking, and if at all in case of ecological restoration there are different processes like invasives management and many other things which are not done otherwise in just protection and conservation. So that's very important point. Then he also talked about ecosystem services. So absolutely important thing, ecosystem services and its valuation. It's something that is very much is still on a backseat, and definitely in case of India, we're not even thinking about it. Government, keep aside government, but even in case of private sector, very few people are talking about ecosystem services and the benefit offered by ecosystem services to the local people. So high time actually we need to integrate that into restoration. Difference between afforestation and restoration, again a very important thing. Many times forest department keep on stressing that we have been doing ecological restoration, but I think very crisply he mentioned that particular difference. And again he talked about holisticness about ecological restoration and ecosystem integrity that needs to be preserved. That's a absolutely important point I felt and must be mentioned in today's session, is that everyone is after doing plantations. And now I think there are many people who are just circulating one video about many famous persons just inviting people to do plantation even in deserts. So definitely we need to maintain the integrity of deserts as deserts, because deserts are contributing to the global cycles just being deserts. So if we make those green, there would be different calamities that would happen, and we are experiencing few in Leh Ladakh. There is precipitation happening instead of snowfall, and thanks to all this kind of efforts, plus of course climate change is there. So that's why this ecosystem integrity, which is a very important point which Ramesh had made. And then many concepts I think are made clear by him, like say there could be various specialization with respect to restoration, then policy framework within just whatever 6-7 points he had made it quite clear that what kind of policy do we really need. Restoration priorities is again extremely important. I would like to tell everyone, tell the audience that few years back Ecological Society has done some such kind of efforts in Panchayat catchment, and we did the land class area assessment for the entire 120 square kilometer of Panchayat catchment. And within that, by using GIS and of course a lot of ground truthing was done, we could carve out areas with special biodiversity as a priority number 1 for restoration, and then 2-3 more priorities we chalked out. Yeah, so extremely important point that we need to do. Capacity building, scaling up, low cost, all these things. And even Gole sir used to talk that we need soft technology which is affordable by mass scale. Means all the people, they should afford it. Then only I think restoration would become really popular. And again, the same thread was pulled by Pradip, saying that just greening is not enough, because when you do greening, you have to import soil, and the moment you import soil, you destroy that particular area. So, so that is not really a good idea, but ecological restoration is the answer, which comes at low cost and absolutely ecologically appropriate. Then I think in Pradip's presentation, all of us could get many hands-on tips that say how to remove Prosopis juliflora, how to get rid of invasives, how to deal with maybe microcosm and maybe herbs, and look at the things more keenly, observe floral species, its association with the strata, and then shape the restoration strategy. So
I
I
guess the point that the local diversity and its propagation in nurseries, because that is not available easily. So all these herbs and grasses which he tried to propagate in the nursery
Yeah.
was very important, because for this special microhabitats, no one will take an effort to do that. So that is important.
Yes, absolutely. So I think with both this presentation, it's quite enriching, and I felt like all of us are so much on the same page. Now it's the need that we scale this up together and reach out to government organizations, maybe officers, and just keep on talking about this and try to spread it. Thank you so much, Pradip and Ramesh and all of you.
You're
So
welcome. You're welcome,
Thank you,
Ketaki.
Ketaki. Thank you, Swati
yeah, so
and
over to
Ecological
Gauri
Society.
for
Yes,
thanks.
yeah. We are coming to the end of our first session. It was a wonderful session. I would like to thank all of the panelists for sharing your experiences and insights with us. Like each of these stories is full of hope, like how things can be done, how they should be done. And they need to be done on a larger scale. And the more it reaches to people, we'll get better results. So thank you very much for sharing all this with us today. I would like to thank the audience for being part of the session today. There were many interesting questions and very lively discussions in question and answers. I would request them to keep your calendars marked for 6th of February. We are having our second session in this series, second discussion on 6th of February. The topic will be ecological restoration, government policies and community participation. Along with the experts from Ecological Society like Gole Madam, Ketaki and Manasi, we'll also have other panelists, Mr. Sunil Limaye, Principal Chief Conservator of Forest, Maharashtra, Mr. Yogesh Gokhale from Teri, Delhi, and Dr. Newadkar from Lamkani, Dhule district. So we are going to have a very diverse panel and expecting another lively discussion on 6th of February. Do keep following Ecological Society's social media handles for updates on these. For today's session, the Zoom platform was provided by Kisan team. I would like to thank them for their technical support. Thank you very much. And then all the members of Friends of Ecological Society. Thank you very much for coming together, planning and making it a reality to have such a wonderful series like Prakash Gole Memorial Discussion Series. Thank you very much. It is a very nice initiative and a lot of learning for all of us from that. And finally, a special thank you for all of you for being there on the year-end weekend and attending the session, making time for it. Have a great year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just a last
you
line
all.
that we are now opening our admission form for the next year's batch, which starts in June. So just watch our social media handles. Thank you.